Thank you, Carol. That was a lovely piece by Grieg. Bats can hear shapes. Plants can eat light. Bees can dance maps. We can hold all these ideas at once and feel both heavy and weightless with the absurd beauty of it all. Good morning. I'm Vicki Ash, and I am a member of UUFDC, and I welcome all of you today. This is my first time, but I know this is a very kind group and that you will help me should I stumble, and I appreciate that. The Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Door County, known affectionately as UUFDC. It's funny how long it takes newcomers to understand that in your lingo. But we welcome all who seek a clearer understanding of their place in the world and a deepening of their spiritual life. We especially welcome back to the fellowship our friend Karen Sandberg, who is our speaker today. On many occasions, she's used her ministry and experiences to help us deepen ours. For those who Zoomed with us during COVID lockdown, she was an encouraging presence during that hard time. Welcome, Karen. We also wish to welcome those of you who are here for perhaps the first time, or perhaps you are returning after an absence. And if you're comfortable doing so, we encourage you to stand up and tell us your name, introduce yourself, and then we can greet you in person. Do we have anyone today? Newcomers, visitors? Hi.
This is my second time.
That works.
I'm Ann Kinzer, and I'm from Monroe, Wisconsin.
Welcome, Ann. Thank you.
I'm up here for a week, but I'm here by myself, and family comes later.
Oh, good.
I'm enjoying it.
Smart of you. Very good. And you probably know there's a guest book outside, right outside the door here, and information about the fellowship. Oh, I'm sorry.
It took me a while to get up.
No, I understand.
My name is Chuck Lewis. I'm from Wheaton, Illinois. This is my sister. We're here for a week.
Nice. Thank you.
Second time.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. Okay, we're set now, right? Okay. Now it's time for announcements, and I have a couple, and then we'll have Marilyn come around with the mic for those of you who don't have a mic in front of you. First of all, please silence your cell phones or anything else that might distract. And if you have trouble hearing anything during the course of the service, maybe we can modify the system. Just let us know. And also, there will be a talk-back discussion after the service once you've had a little coffee and some goodies. And now, announcements from you all. Here's one.
These could be joys or concerns, but they're not really emotion laden. So one is that after plant powered eating last year, I got a little carried away with the garden this year. And there are some bags of excess in the fridge of lettuce and kale and greens and whatever. And there will be more if there's any interest in that for those of you whose condo association doesn't allow gardening. Second, and maybe more important, is that I know that tick season is here and has already impacted members of the congregation. If you are unfamiliar with tick control, this is from the Milwaukee Botanical Garden. Cotton balls stuffed into a toilet paper tube, treated with permethrin, and then stuck in the wood pile under the porch, in the garage barn, whatever. We think about deer ticks, but in fact, the white-footed mouse is the real vector for transmitting ticks. It kills the ticks, doesn't hurt the mice. They take that nice, soft cotton for their bedding back to their nests, and it's actually a very effective way of controlling ticks within the perimeter of your yard. So
Great.
Important thing to know. And dry your clothes. If you've been on a hike, I was in Newport yesterday, Put them in the dryer immediately. Don't wash them. 6 minutes on high heat, whatever you've been hiking in will kill the ticks. Washing them is less effective.
Very
So
good to know.
put them straight into the dryer on high heat. And yeah, you can wipe the dryer out later if you had a little mud on your socks. But yeah, that's the best way to control.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Very
you.
helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Cotton ball.
Do we have other announcements this morning? Al? Oh, wait.
I just want to remind you that Leslie Nelson, who is in the gallery now, will be back here on July 31st, and she is going to have a workshop for what she calls memory quilts. Actually, if you have a hanky or some special thing from your family, bring it, and you can embroider it, and then and then you can tell us what kind of memory that particular piece evokes.
Lindley's, to keep in the textile vein, our Sister Bay Trillium Quilt Guild turned 25 years old this year. We have a marvelous exhibit at Sister Bay Village Hall till 4 o'clock today. And there are some astounding quilts there. And I'm a member, and Vicki is our president. So please come visit. Fight the traffic because it's worth it.
And it's free. I mean, what is there to do in Sister Bay that's free except sit on the beach? Yes, you can look at the quilts. Any more? We good? All right. Now I think it's time to begin our service. Today's opening words are from William F. Schultz. They're actually number 429 in the hymnal, which is a gold mine in the back of the hymnal. Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. Please stand as you are able for hymn number 65. 65. Sweet June days are gone again, once more the glad earth yields its golden wealth of rippling grain and breath of colder fields, and deep the shade of summer woods and glow of summer air, and leading thoughts of happy moods of love and joy and prayer. The sweet June days are gone again, the birds are on the wing, bright anthems in their merry strain, unconsciously they sing. Oh, come, Lord, brings with good these happy summer days. Oh, all the joys of field and wood, we lift our song of praise. You may stay standing. We will say together I can never remember what it's called. Unison affirmation. Thank you. and the doxology. We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within a caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung, in every land, by every tongue. Please be seated. It's at this point where, if you have a joy filling your heart or a concern that will be made lighter by being voiced, we invite you to share it. Marilyn will bring the mic to you. And remember, this service is broadcast, and please don't share names without the person's permission. There's a joy or a concern. A joy.
Sally Mom is continuing her yo-yo journey of health. She's back home and would appreciate calls, cards, visits. She's still not fully recovered from her health issues, but she's making progress.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Oh.
Judy Brudd. I'm just delighted because our daughter who lives in Singapore is coming this coming week, and we haven't seen her in a year. And so as a result, our son and grandkids are coming as well. And so we're pretty happy about that, especially since our 2 boy grandchildren were just here for a week. So we feel pretty fortunate.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And now I invite you to join me in a moment of silence. Let us still our minds and open our hearts. I'm sorry. We better do the offertory. I'll be in trouble. I am sorry. And now the offertory in support of this place and the ministry it inspires. Thank you. Again, a moment of silence. I invite you to join me in a moment of silence. Let us still our minds and open our hearts to fully appreciate life here and now. Please welcome Karen Sandberg, whose message today is Rediscovering Enchantment.
Thank you, Vicki. Well, I have a little joy I'd like to share, if I have permission. I was lovely, hosted so delightfully last night by Bob and Wilma. So I wanted to thank you for that. And it was delightful. We had a really nice time. It's always a joy to come back here, that's for sure. So our reading today is a poem by Mary Oliver. It's an adaptation of her poem, Messenger. My work is to love the world. Here are the sunflowers, there the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young? And I'm still not half perfect. All right, let me keep my mind on things that matter. This is my work, which, if I'm honest, is mostly just standing still and learning to be enchanted. The phoebe, the delphinium, the sheep in the pasture, which is mostly rejoicing because all the ingredients are there, which is gratitude. To be given a mind and a heart and this body of clothes, a mouth which gives shouts of joy to the moth and to the wren, even to the sleepy dug-up clam, telling them all over and over, this is how we live. Did you know that you live next to an enchantress? Maybe you do. She's part of the charm of living in this area. Or have you grown so accustomed to her that you've already forgotten her alchemy? She's enormous. She's moody, dark and thrashing about one day, serene and delightful the next. That's actually part of what I love about her. She can be cold, sometimes even frigid. She has the ability to take me in her arms and calm me and center me and make my bones loosen. The day with her is restorative, to say the least. It's not just what she does for me now. She's also tied to memories that have colored my childhood. Do you know her? Does she enchant you too? I'm talking about Lake Michigan. When I was young, my family vacationed every summer at Michigan's sister, Lake Superior. Now, you should know, I come from a family that believes you should be doing something. In fact, complaining that there was nothing to do never brought around sympathy or even creative suggestions, but instead a wheelbarrow full of chores. I soon figured out it was best to look busy. Each summer, we would drive to a tiny little town called Hawthorne, Wisconsin, where my grandmother lived. My dad and his brothers would tackle any big projects Grandma needed done to her house. We kids, of course, would try to make ourselves scarce, reading old Nancy Drew books from her bookshelves, picking blueberries in the back garden, wandering off to the county cemetery where my grandpa lay, making up stories and playing games among the tombstones. Once the men were done working for the day, we'd pile into the car and head straight to Lake Superior. There's something about water that I can't see the other side of for me. You can keep your cute little North Woods lakes. Give me an expansive horizon and the wonderment of not really knowing what's out there. As a child, I imagined whales, submarines, pirate ships, and sunken treasure. In its presence, I always felt connected to something bigger than myself. That water was so large and ever-changing. Once we were at the lake, we'd stake out our towels in the sand. My mom would unpack a picnic, and we kids were free to do whatever we wanted to do. My older brother directed us in making rafts out of driftwood logs. I would get lost in making sand castles with rocks and twigs to decorate it. My dad would take to the lake with a bar of Fels Naphtha soap and scrub off the workaday sweat. My mother, who was an avid swimmer, would tuck her hair up into her rubber swim cap, and she'd ritually swim out to the same spot every time we visited. My parents relaxed there too. They read books, napped, or chatted quietly as we kids did whatever we wanted to do. The freedom to do nothing was allowed there. The lake enchanted my parents too. They would let time evaporate and not hear the call of responsibility that nagged them at home. This feeling grew deep in my bones during these childhood summers, and now, whenever I'm in front of a large body of water, the enchantress still whispers in my ear, reminds me that we're all connected, and that surprising things are still possible, just like when I was a child. As children, we're much more able to fall into the mysteries of enchantment. We don't necessarily know how things really work, so we eagerly fill in the blanks with our own imaginings. But even without that kind of magical thinking, when we're young, if you think back on it, we were certainly more able to be aware of how things made us feel when we were doing them. Remember playing neighborhood games, flashlight tag or capture the flag, for hours? Fully working side by side in complete connection to your teammates. You knew all the areas in the neighborhood that were tricky and hard to navigate when trying to capture the flag. In the twilight of a warm summer night, time felt so different. Recently, I came across a book by Catherine May called Enchantment: Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age. She agrees that enchantment is something that comes easily to us as children, but it is something we tend to put away when we become adults. When we're young, our childlike curiosity can sometimes lead us into disappointment or harm. As a result, as we mature, we learn to turn to self-protection, choosing certainty over curiosity, armor over vulnerability, and knowing over learning. As May pondered enchantment and the loss of it in her life, she realized she wanted to cultivate it again. After COVID and the political upheaval we've experienced in the last few years, she felt it was necessary for her own mental health and her spirit to do so. Because the only word that made any sense for how she was feeling was discombobulated. I confess I feel discombobulated these days too. Connection is what I'm searching for, May said. The chance to merge into the drift of the world, to feel fully engaged and to enter into its wealth so completely that I can forget myself. Dr. Sharon Blackie, an award-winning writer and psychologist, says that enchantment has nothing to do with fantasy, escapism, or magical thinking, like one might expect, but instead it's founded on a vivid sense of belongingness to a rich and many-layered world. She says it's a profound and wholehearted participation in the adventure of life. As someone who's now retired and just had her husband join her this summer in retirement, these were words that name some of the feelings that I'd like to have about this next stage of my life, something I'd like to find again. I've always loved the word adventure. I'd like to enter into this last chapter of my life with a sense of adventure as well. I was struck by the words Dr. Blackie used in her definition because they were similar words that I've heard from one of my favorite teachers, Dr. Brene Brown, who's a researcher of vulnerability and shame. It made me want to delve into both their words more deeply. Now, when I was in seminary, we would often say, let's unpack that. So I'd like to do that this morning with this phrase about enchantment by Dr. Blackie. It's a lot to take in, so let me repeat it. Enchantment is founded on a vivid sense of belongingness to a rich and many-layered world, a profound and wholehearted participation in the adventure of life. Now, when I unpack statements, I like to start with a definition. The dictionary gives the explanation of the noun enchantment to be a feeling of great pleasure and delight. As I read this definition, I thought about the sense of enchantment I feel when I'm at Lake Michigan. It certainly gives me pleasure and delight as I see and smell and touch all that's there. It reaches back into my past and it reminds me of carefree summers with my family. The energy of the lake seeps into my bones. It physically and mentally relaxes me. So I'd say I'm certainly experiencing pleasure and delight. So holding that, let's keep unpacking. She says, enchantment is founded on a vivid sense of belongingness. Belonging. This word stood out to me because Brene Brown talks a lot about the differences between fitting in and belonging. She says fitting in is about assessing the situation and then changing ourselves to become what we need to be accepted. Her definition of belonging is that we're not required to change at all. To belong, we only need to be who we already are. Where were these words when I was trying to find my place in a new school, or as a new employee, or even a new member of a family? How often have you tried so very hard to figure out how to fit in, or how to change yourself with a new person or a group, only to figure out later on that you never really felt comfortable, or often felt left out or misunderstood? And then I think again about people or groups that I've fallen in with who immediately accept me just as I am. That feeling is completely delightful. You feel comfortable, you feel whole, you feel valued. That's an entirely different connection than trying to fit in. When belonging occurs, we feel that enchanting connection. We've all felt that at different times and with different people. It's magical, isn't it? Dr. Blackie goes on to say that we feel this belonging in a rich and many-layered world. For me, I see this as that connection, the sense of being a part of something bigger than ourselves. I truly feel at Lake Michigan, the ocean, or any great body of water that I'm connected. It's almost impossible for me not to feel that. It's not just the water. All of my senses are engaged when I'm there. The texture of the sand, the sound of the birds calling to each other, the loud crash or quiet ripples of the water. That surprising coolness as you enter the lake. The vast expanse of that horizon always mesmerizes me. And it's a multisensory and an emotional experience for me. It definitely feels multi-layered. Dr. Blackie goes on to say that enchantment is a profound and wholehearted participation in the adventure of life. The word wholeheartedness stood out to me too, as a word Dr. Brene Brown talks a lot about. She's done a lot of research on this. She defines wholeheartedness as a way of engaging our lives from an inner sense of worthiness and then bringing our full selves to the table. That means truly believing we're worthy of being present, of being seen just as we are, truly believing we belong, and then bringing that to the table. The table meaning all the things we engage in and all the things we show up for. And here's the thing, when we so bravely do that, life can't help but become an adventure. And that's enchantment. It sounds lovely, it really does, but then why do we so rarely engage in it? What do we risk? What keeps us from that? Catherine May says, it feels like we're often on high alert these days. We spent so long anxiously scanning our news feeds that we now live in a fixed state of relentless checking. This has become our reading material now. We're not really looking for anything. We're just looking. Do you find yourself doing that? I know I do. Dr. Anna Lembeck, a psychiatrist that specializes in opioids and their effect on our brain, has done new studies on how our mind reacts to increased levels of dopamine. Dopamine is a part of our neural pathway that's critical for keeping us alive. These mechanisms evolve in our brain to draw us to essential things like water and food and safety, social interactions. And she says for decades, scientists thought dopamine drew us to these needs by providing a strong sense of pleasure. And that makes sense. But over the past decade, new research indicates that dopamine does not make you feel happy. In fact, there's a lot of data to support the idea that dopamine is interfering with our pleasure. Dr. Lembeck's studies now show that dopamine actually generates desire, not pleasure. Dopamine makes you want things. And it goes even further. Dopamine tells your brain to pay particular attention to whatever triggers that surge of wanting. And here's the surprising part. You might not even like the activity that triggers the dopamine surge. If you talk to people who spend a lot of time shopping online or going through social media and news feeds, they don't necessarily feel good after doing it. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that says it's quite the opposite, that you end up feeling worse than before you started. This seems to go hand in hand with reports that today's youth are more anxious and depressed due to too much time on social media. And yet, there we often are, scrolling through our news feeds or social media, wanting, seeking something. Catherine May says that in the last few years, it feels like if we stop looking, something terrible might happen. And to be honest, there were times when terrible things really did happen. She says looking has become our magical thinking. At first, it used to feel proactive, but now it feels a little bit dark. Now she says if we don't check, if we aren't looking over our shoulder, we worry about not knowing about what's going on. May says the last thing propping up the sky is our eternal vigilance to the latest events. As I reflected on this and how often I can fall down that rabbit hole, I felt determined not to allow this last chapter of my life to be defined by this. My husband laughs at me because I have refused to read any more articles about a certain ex-politician. He tells people that in my world, this man does not exist. And it's true. I don't want to give this person any more of my time and energy. And what's interesting is when you don't click on those articles don't show up as much anymore. I feel there are more important things to tend to in my life, and to be completely honest, outside of voting, there's not much I can do to control his antics. So I stopped offering him my vigilance. Getting caught up in the world of his nonsense was adding weight and anguish to my life. He has made me feel discombobulated. And to be honest, at my age, when I'm not even really sure what day it is, that's the last thing I need. Instead, I want to engage in things that enchant me, things that make me feel connected to something bigger than myself and help me to live wholeheartedly. So what can we do to find these things? I choose to start with things that I know I love doing, things that when I'm engaged with them, time seems to evaporate. I'm a writer. I can sit down and write, and suddenly 3 hours have passed in what I think is 20 minutes, and it surprises me every single time. Writing is a place where I bring my whole self to the table. The words I share with you whenever I visit are a large part of those efforts. And you also kindly hold my words with respect and reflection and grace. I feel my connection to you in these words, and you in hearing them. It's magical. It's enchanting. A friend of mine is a type A accountant who's run her own business for decades. She never sits still. She's very good at what she does, and people really respect her. But the real enchantment in her life is bird photography. There she can sit quietly in a field waiting for the perfect photo. 3 hours later, she's surprised that she's been there for so long. Her body rests in that time. Her mind quiets, and time stands still. That is enchantment. What enchants you? Poetry, creating art or music, animals, nature, theater, loved ones. We all have things or people that we know draw us in. They accept us fully for who we are, and they allow us to be our wholehearted self. I invite you to go home today and think on that. When does time evaporate for you? When do you feel connected to something bigger than yourself? Seek those things more often. Hold those things close to your bones. They're magical and so necessary for our mental health and our physical health. Do not let social media and news feeds fool you into thinking that vigilance there constitutes better living. Choose adventure over self-protection. Try something you've always been interested in. Risk discovery. Risk failing, which is really hard to do as you become older. But risk failing. I started ukulele and I stink. I do. I'm almost tempted not to go back, but I'm going to do it. Keep wondering and re-examining your beliefs and thoughts. Lay down your protective armor and instead share your vulnerability. As Unitarian Universalists, we should all continue to embrace learning and knowing, holding our current truths ever so lightly in our hands. I suspect a big part of our country's division right now is each side is clutching their truths way too tightly, afraid to let go of what might not be true. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be big things. You can find small things to be enchanting too. After randomly reading 3 books that had strong beekeepers as characters, I was enchanted by the descriptions of and habits and the intelligence of bees. I wanted to learn more, and amazingly enough, I found out a woman in my book group was a beekeeper. I asked her if I could help her. She was delighted to have me join her. And I was a little nervous, but I entered it with a wholeheartedness and an entire bee suit. I was immediately enchanted by this tiny community, so busy and so bustling. Well, we pulled out the screens from the hive and cleared off excess wax. Bees created another skin over my gloved hand. Their warm and gentle hum was so intoxicating. Their sweet, musky smell and low vibrations centered me. Time disappeared as I watched their comings and goings. I marveled as they performed their different duties, and I was lost in the intensity of their purpose. I was enchanted. Catherine May shared how she used to love to look at the moon. When she was a child, she even had conversations with it. But of course, as she aged, she packed away that habit. In her desire to find enchantment again, she woke up one night and decided to seek that old friend of hers. Walking out into her yard in the silver light of the moon, she sat down in a chair and kicked off her slippers and let her feet make contact with the cool grass of the earth. She felt that instant reciprocity between the earth and herself. She said she closed her eyes and relieved herself of even searching for language. but instead she just let herself feel. As the moon watched her so patiently, she felt its tenacious pull, and she wondered how she could ever have forgotten this habit, and she vowed to return to it again and again. We are forgetful creatures, obsessed with the endless tasks that weigh heavily on our days. They cloud our eyes from seeing the celestial and earthly dance that wants to share its enchantment with us. In our reading earlier, Mary Oliver tells us that our work is mostly to stand still and be astonished. That magic, that alchemy is always available all the time, and yet the truth seems so easily hidden from our view. Everything is connected. There's only one whole, and we exist within that system. Catherine May says she doesn't have to believe in God as a deity, but instead she sees God as the entire mesh of existence that binds us together in everything, in ways we can see and feel if we just open ourselves up to it. Enchantment has always been there. It's never left us. We have left it. As I enter into this last chapter of my life, I intend to engage with wholeheartedness into this enchanting adventure of life. I wish the same for you. May it be so.
Thank you very much, Karen. And just a reminder that following the service today, please enjoy the fellowship and the goodies I spied out there in the gathering room. But in 15 minutes, the chimes will ring and we will gather back here for a discussion about today's message. Please stand as you are able for hymn 1064 in the Teal Hill Hymn Supplement. Note this hymn goes on to the next pages, and that we will use the chorale accompaniment rather than the one that's in the songbook.
Standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never I know. My universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my boat. Stand my sail and moon my rudder, as I fly a starry sea. Dreaming o'er the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep. Drifting near my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in a beautiful blue boat. I give thanks to the waves that hold me, in the great winds urging me on. Read the infinite sea before me, sing a starlight sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I
Thank you. Please be seated. Our closing words today and chalice extinguishing are from Chief Dan George of the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation. The beauty of the trees, the softness of the air, the fragrance of the grass speaks to me. The summit of the mountain, the thunder of the sky, the rhythm of the sea speaks to me. The faintness of the stars, the freshness of the morning, the dewdrop on the flower speaks to me. The strength of the fire, the taste of salmon, the trail of the sun, and the life that never goes away, they speak to me, and my heart soars.